In Ashwood Academy's elite courtyard, a defiant 17-year-old was about to confront her controlling father's fury. What started as a routine parents' weekend photo session took a shocking turn when family tensions exploded into public violence. Scarlett Niller wasn't your typical boarding school rebel. For years, she had questioned her tech mogul father's empire, known for her razor-sharp intelligence and stubborn independence. When her father demanded she publicly apologize for allegedly sabotaging her sister's social media brand, she had no idea she was walking into a carefully orchestrated trap. Scarlett's defiant refusal led to a slap that shattered their perfect family facade and revealed her bodyguard's true loyalties when Marcus Rivera stepped protectively between them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Scarlett Niller stood at her dormitory window, watching the pristine lawns of Ashwood Academy transform into a carefully choreographed theater of wealth and privilege. Parents' Weekend had arrived with its usual fanfare, luxury cars gliding through the wrought iron gates, designer luggage being whisked away by uniformed staff, and the soft murmur of conversations that carried the weight of corporate mergers and charitable galas. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, her breath fogging the window as she spotted the familiar black Tesla Model S pulling into the circular drive. David Niller had arrived, and with him, the suffocating tension that followed wherever he went. "He's here," she murmured to her empty room, though she knew Marcus would be listening through whatever surveillance equipment her father had installed. The security detail had been her constant shadow for 3 years now, a reminder of her father's need to control every aspect of her existence. From her third-floor vantage point, she watched her father emerge from the car with the practiced grace of a man accustomed to being photographed. Even at 45, David Niller commanded attention, his silver-streaked hair perfectly styled, his charcoal suit tailored to emphasize his still athletic frame. He paused for a moment, scanning the courtyard with the calculating gaze of a predator assessing territory. Then Lily appeared. Scarlett's 15-year-old sister practically floated down the academy's stone steps, her honey blonde hair catching the afternoon sunlight like spun gold. She wore a pale pink sundress that photographed beautifully. Scarlett knew because she'd seen Lily taking test shots in their bathroom mirror earlier that morning. Every movement was calculated for maximum visual impact, from the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear to the genuine-looking smile that never quite reached her eyes. "There's my star," David's voice carried across the courtyard as he opened his arms for Lily's embrace. The reunion was picture-perfect, literally. Scarlett could see at least 3 phones capturing the moment from different angles. Parents and students alike paused to watch, drawn by the magnetic pull of celebrity. Lily at Lily Niller Official had 2.8 million followers across her social media platforms. At 15, she was already earning more money than most adults would see in a lifetime, her influence carefully cultivated and monetized by their father's marketing team. Every outfit, every location, every candid moment was meticulously planned to maintain her image as the perfect teenage daughter of a tech mogul. Scarlett, meanwhile, remained at her window, invisible as always. She watched her father's eyes sweep the courtyard again, this time with obvious annoyance. She knew he was looking for her, expecting her to materialize beside Lily for the obligatory family photos that would be posted across their social media empire within the hour. The thought made her stomach clench with familiar dread. "Miss Scarlett?" Marcus Rivera's voice came from behind her, professional and neutral as always. She hadn't heard him enter, which wasn't unusual. Despite his impressive physical presence, 6'2", with the kind of controlled posture that spoke of military training, Marcus moved with surprising stealth. "He's looking for me," she said without turning around. "Your father would like you to join them in the courtyard." Scarlett finally pivoted away from the window, meeting Marcus's steady brown eyes. There was something different in his expression today, though she couldn't quite identify what it was. In the 3 years he'd been assigned as her security detail, Marcus had maintained perfect professional distance. He spoke when necessary, intervened when required by his duties, and otherwise remained as unobtrusive as a 6-foot shadow could be. "And if I don't want to join them?" "That's your choice to make." The words surprised her. Usually, Marcus would deliver her father's requests, with the implicit understanding that they weren't actually requests at all. Today, there was something almost supportive in his tone. Before she could analyze it further, her phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Dad wants family pics." "Where are you?" Scarlett sighed, recognizing the familiar pattern. Lily would ask nicely first, then with increasing urgency, until finally their father would lose patience and take matters into his own hands. The cycle was as predictable as it was exhausting. "Fine," she muttered, grabbing a wrinkled cardigan from her desk chair. If she was going to be forced into family photos, she'd at least make her displeasure obvious through her wardrobe choices. Marcus followed at his usual discreet distance as she made her way through the academy's limestone corridors. The buildings had been designed to evoke Old English universities, complete with stained glass windows and Gothic arches. Normally, Scarlett found comfort in the architecture's solid permanence, but today the walls felt oppressive, as if they were closing in on her. She could hear the commotion before she reached the courtyard, the excited chatter of students and parents, the clicking of professional cameras, and underneath it all, her father's commanding voice orchestrating the scene. "Lily, turn slightly to your left. Perfect. Now maybe lean into me a bit more. Yes, that's it." David Niller was in his element, directing the impromptu photo shoot with the expertise of someone who understood the value of visual narratives. A small crowd had gathered to watch, drawn by the combination of wealth, beauty, and social media fame that the Niller family represented. Scarlett hesitated at the edge of the courtyard, suddenly aware of her rumpled cardigan and the coffee stain on her jeans. Next to Lily's effortless perfection, she felt like a rough draft of a person. "Scarlett?" Her father's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. "There you are. Come here, sweetheart." The endearment sounded strange coming from him, performing for their audience. In private, David rarely used pet names unless he wanted something. She approached slowly, hyper-aware of the eyes tracking her movement. Some of the watching parents whispered among themselves. She caught fragments about the other daughter, and such a shame, that made her cheeks burn with familiar humiliation. "Daddy," Lily said softly, "maybe we should do some individual shots first? The lighting is so perfect right now." Scarlett recognized the attempt at diplomacy, but their father was already shaking his head. "Family photos first," David insisted, his smile never wavering even as his eyes flashed with irritation. "Scarlett, stand here next to your sister." She took her assigned position, her muscles tense with the effort of appearing relaxed. The photographer, when had her father hired a photographer, began snapping shots rapidly. The camera's shutter sounded like machine gun fire. "Scarlett, honey, could you smile?" The photographer's voice was professionally cheerful. "Maybe put your arm around your sister." She forced her lips into what she hoped passed for a smile, but apparently it wasn't convincing enough. "Jesus Christ, Scarlett," David muttered under his breath, his public facade slipping for just a moment. "Is it too much to ask for you to look like you're part of this family?" The words hit like a physical blow, all the more painful because they were delivered in front of their audience. Scarlett felt her forced smile crumble, replaced by the familiar mask of defiant indifference she wore like armor. "Maybe I don't want to be part of it," she said quietly. The courtyard fell silent. Even the photographer lowered his camera, sensing the shift in atmosphere. David's expression darkened, his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "What did you say?" "I said maybe I don't want to be part of your perfect family photo op." Scarlett's voice grew stronger, fueled by years of accumulated resentment. "Maybe I'm tired of pretending we're something we're not." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the kind of entertainment they'd expected from Parents' Weekend. "Scarlett." Lily's voice was barely a whisper, a warning wrapped in her sister's name. But Scarlett was past caring about warnings. The words she'd been swallowing for years finally demanded to be spoken. "You want to know why I won't smile for your cameras, Dad? Because I know what happens to these photos. They get posted online with captions about what a perfect family we are. And it's all a lie. We're not perfect. We're not even a real family half the time." David stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried across the silent courtyard. "You will not embarrass this family. You will not sabotage everything your sister has worked for because you're jealous of her success. Sabotage? Scarlett's laugh was bitter. Is that what we're calling it now? Because I won't play dress-up for your social media empire? You posted that photo, David accused, his voice rising. That unflattering picture of Lily from last week. You deliberately tried to damage her brand. Scarlett stared at him in genuine confusion. What photo? I don't even follow her accounts. Don't lie to me. David's control was slipping completely now, his voice carrying the edge of rage that she knew all too well from private family moments. The candid shot of her eating in the cafeteria. No makeup, looking tired. Posted from an anonymous account that the tech team traced back to the Academy's network. I didn't. Enough! David's voice exploded across the courtyard. I am tired of your lies, your disrespect, your constant attempts to tear down everything good in this family. You will apologize to your sister, publicly, right now. The demand hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Scarlett could feel the weight of every gaze in the courtyard, the mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and voyeuristic excitement that came with witnessing a family's private drama played out in public. She looked at Lily, searching her sister's face for some sign of, what? Support? Understanding? Instead, she saw only fear and pleading, not for justice, but for compliance. No, Scarlett said simply. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. David's face flushed red, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. For a moment, Scarlett thought he might actually lose control completely, might reveal the man she knew existed beneath his polished exterior. Instead, he did something worse. His hand moved so quickly she barely saw it coming. The slap connected with her cheek with a sound like a gunshot, the force of it turning her head and sending shocked gasps through the crowd. The pain was immediate and sharp, but it was nothing compared to the humiliation of the moment. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the photographer had stopped shooting, his camera hanging forgotten around his neck. Scarlett's cheek burned, but she refused to raise her hand to touch it. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her reaction. Instead, she met his eyes directly, her own blazing with a fury that had been building for 17 years. There's the real David Niller, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. Hope you got that on camera. For a heartbeat, father and daughter stared at each other across an unbridgeable chasm of hurt and anger. Then something shifted in the air behind her, a presence moving with sudden purpose. Marcus Rivera stepped forward, his movements smooth but unmistakably threatening as he positioned himself between David and Scarlett. His voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of someone accustomed to giving orders in life-or-death situations. Sir, he said quietly, I think it's time for you to step back. The words weren't loud, but they cut through the tension like a blade. David's eyes snapped to Marcus, and for the first time since Scarlett had known him, her father looked genuinely uncertain. Excuse me? David's voice was dangerous, but there was something else there too. Surprise, maybe even fear. Marcus didn't move, but his posture shifted almost imperceptibly, settling into the balanced stance of someone prepared for conflict. I said, step back, sir. The courtyard held its collective breath, waiting to see what would happen next, but Scarlett was no longer watching her father. She was staring at Marcus, seeing him clearly, for perhaps the first time in 3 years. This wasn't the reaction of an employee protecting his boss's daughter. This was something else entirely. Something personal. Something that suggested Marcus Rivera's loyalties might not lie where she'd always assumed they did. The realization hit her like a second slap, leaving her reeling with questions she'd never thought to ask. Who was Marcus really? Who was he working for? And why did his intervention feel less like duty and more like a choice to protect her from the man who was supposed to be his employer? As the shocked silence stretched on, Scarlett found herself wondering if everything she thought she knew about her life was about to change. Marcus's hand remained steady at his side, but Scarlett could see the tension coiled in his shoulders like a spring wound too tight. The courtyard had fallen into the kind of silence that precedes either violence or revelation. She wasn't sure which would be worse. David's face cycled through emotions like a broken traffic light. Surprise gave way to indignation, then to something darker. His eyes narrowed as he studied Marcus with the calculating gaze he usually reserved for hostile board members. "Rivera?" David's voice carried the sharp edge of authority. "Stand down. This is a family matter." "No, sir," Marcus replied, his tone respectful but immovable. "I don't think it is." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the gathered parents and students seemed frozen in place, their expensive phones capturing every moment of what would undoubtedly become Ashwood Academy's most talked about Parents' Weekend in decades. Scarlett touched her cheek, feeling the heat radiating from where her father's hand had connected. The physical pain was manageable. She'd endured worse during her rebellious middle school years, but the public humiliation burned deeper than any slap could reach. "This is highly inappropriate," came the crisp voice of Headmaster Whitmore as he approached through the crowd like a ship cutting through still water. At 62, Dr. Edmund Whitmore had spent his career managing the delicate egos and explosive tempers of the ultra-wealthy. His presence carried the weight of institutional authority and old money discretion. "Headmaster," David immediately shifted gears, his voice taking on the smooth tone he used during damage control. "I apologize for the disruption. Family tensions, you understand. The stress of running a major corporation while trying to be present for my daughters. Sometimes it gets the better of me." Scarlett watched in fascination as her father performed his transformation. The violent man who had struck her moments before dissolved, replaced by the charming, slightly overwhelmed single-father figure his public relations team had crafted so carefully. "Of course, Mr. Niller," Whitmore replied diplomatically. "Perhaps we might continue this conversation in my office, away from the cameras?" Only then did David seem to notice the phones still pointed in their direction. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly, a tell that Scarlett had learned to recognize years ago. "Absolutely. Scarlett will discuss this privately." "Actually," Marcus interjected, "I think Miss Scarlett should return to her dormitory to rest." David's head snapped toward Marcus so quickly, Scarlett was surprised he didn't get whiplash. "Excuse me?" "She's had a shock," Marcus said simply. "She needs time to process what just happened." There was something in the way he said it that made Scarlett's pulse quicken. Not just the words themselves, but the tone. Protective in a way that went beyond professional duty. She'd heard Marcus speak hundreds of times over the past 3 years, but never like this. Never like someone who actually cared about her well-being, rather than simply completing his assigned tasks. "Marcus is right," Lily spoke for the first time since the confrontation began. Her voice was small, barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. She should go rest. Scarlett looked at her sister, really looked at her, and saw something she'd missed in all their years of manufactured rivalry. Fear. Not fear of their father's anger, or the social media fallout, or the whispered gossip that would follow this incident for months. Fear for Scarlett herself. When had that happened? When had Lily started worrying about her older sister instead of just seeing her as an obstacle to overcome? "Very well," David said through gritted teeth. "Marcus, escort Scarlett to her room. I'll speak with her later, once we've all had time to cool down." The dismissal was clear, but Marcus didn't move. Instead, he looked directly at Scarlett, waiting for her permission. It was such a small gesture, asking rather than assuming, but it hit her like a revelation. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I'd like to go back to my room." Marcus nodded and stepped aside, creating space for her to move while still maintaining his position between her and David. As they walked away, Scarlett could hear her father's voice behind them, already spinning the narrative for Headmaster Whitmore and any parents still within earshot. "Teenage defiance. You know how it is. Her therapist says it's normal for children of divorce to act out when they feel their family dynamic shifting." The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly that Scarlett almost admired his skill. Her parents had never been divorced. Grace Niller was very much alive, just heavily medicated and emotionally absent. But David understood that a sympathetic backstory would deflect criticism far more effectively than the truth. They walked in silence through the academy's corridors, past oil paintings of distinguished alumni and trophy cases filled with academic and athletic honors. The normal bustle of student life seemed muted, as if the very walls were holding their breath. It wasn't until they reached her dormitory that Marcus finally spoke. "Are you hurt?" The question was simple, but something in his voice made her throat tighten unexpectedly. When was the last time someone had asked if she was hurt and actually wanted to know the answer? "I'm fine," she said automatically, then caught herself. "I mean, my cheek stings, but I've had worse." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus stopped walking. "You've had worse?" There was something dangerous in his tone now, something that made her look at him more carefully. His jaw was set tight, and his hands had curled into fists at his sides. "I didn't mean," she started, then stopped. Why was she making excuses? Why was she protecting David from the implications of her own words? "Miss Scarlett," Marcus said carefully, "how long has your father been physical with you?" The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. In 3 years of living under Marcus's protection, they had never discussed David's behavior beyond the necessary logistics of security protocols. She had assumed Marcus either didn't notice or didn't care about the emotional dynamics of the family he was paid to guard. Apparently, she had been wrong about that too. "It's not. He doesn't usually do it in public," she heard herself saying. "Today was different. I pushed too hard." "No," Marcus's voice was firm. "You didn't push anything. You stood up for yourself." And he responded with violence. "That's on him, not you." They had reached her dormitory room, but neither of them moved toward the door. Instead, they stood in the hallway, the weight of unspoken truths settling between them like dust. "Why did you step in?" Scarlett asked suddenly. "I mean, really, you work for him. Your job is to protect me from outside threats, not from family." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing his words carefully. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "Sometimes the biggest threats come from the people who are supposed to love us most." The simple statement hit her like a physical blow. Not because it was harsh, but because it was true. Because it acknowledged something she'd been trying to deny for years. That David Niller, for all his public charm and corporate success, was dangerous to his own children. "Marcus," she said slowly, "who do you really work for?" His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. A moment of decision, perhaps, or recognition that they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. "Right now," he said finally, "I work for you." Before she could ask what he meant by that, footsteps echoed in the hallway behind them. They both turned to see Jamie Thompson approaching, her face flushed with concern and barely contained anger. "Scarlett!" Jamie's voice carried down the corridor as she half ran toward them. "Are you okay? I just heard what happened in the courtyard, and I can't believe that bastard actually." She stopped short when she noticed Marcus, her expression shifting to polite wariness. In the 3 years they'd been roommates, Jamie had always been respectful but distant with Scarlett's security detail, treating him like an expensive piece of furniture that happened to be capable of conversation. "It's okay," Scarlett said quickly. "Marcus was just making sure I got back safely." Jamie nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on Marcus with newfound intensity. She had witnessed the aftermath of too many of Scarlett's family encounters not to recognize the significance of what had happened today. "I'll leave you with your friend," Marcus said, stepping back. But before he turned to go, he looked directly at Scarlett one more time. "If you need anything at all, you know how to reach me." There was weight in those words that went far beyond the standard security protocol. As he walked away, Scarlett found herself staring after him with a dozen new questions crowding her mind. "Okay," Jamie said the moment Marcus disappeared around the corner. "What the hell just happened out there? And don't give me some bullshit story about family drama, because I saw the way your bodyguard looked ready to take your father apart with his bare hands." Scarlett touched her cheek again, feeling the lingering heat from David's slap. But more than that, she was thinking about Marcus's words. "Right now, I work for you. Not for David. Not for the Niller family corporate interests. For her. The question was, what did that mean? And more importantly, what was she going to do about it? The digital clock on Scarlett's nightstand glowed 2:47 a.m., its red numbers cutting through the darkness like an accusation. She'd been staring at her laptop screen for hours, her eyes burning from the blue light, but sleep felt impossible after the day's revelations. Jamie had finally crashed around midnight, sprawled across her bed in the unconscious abandon that came with a clear conscience. But Scarlett's mind raced with questions that demanded answers, starting with the most pressing one. Who exactly was Marcus Rivera? Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced stealth, a skill she'd developed during years of covert research into her father's business dealings. The Academy's Wi-Fi was heavily monitored, but Scarlett had learned to navigate around most digital surveillance through a combination of VPNs and carefully chosen search terms. Marcus Rivera. Former military, private security. The basic facts matched what she'd always been told, but now she dug deeper, following digital breadcrumbs through military databases and employment records that she'd never bothered to examine before. What she found made her stomach clench with confusion. According to the records she could access, Marcus had been hired by Niller Technologies 3 years ago, shortly after her 15th birthday. His employment file listed his salary, benefits, and official duties as personal security specialist assigned to family protection detail. Standard corporate security language. But when she cross-referenced the payment records, information she shouldn't have been able to access but had managed to obtain through a combination of saved passwords and her father's predictable security habits, something didn't add up. Marcus's salary was being paid from an account she'd never seen before. Not from Niller Technologies' standard payroll system, not from David's personal accounts, but from something called the Eleanor M. Trust. Eleanor M. Scarlett sat back in her desk chair, her mind spinning. She'd never heard of any Eleanor connected to their family finances. Her mother's name was Grace, her father's assistant was named Patricia, and she couldn't think of any Eleanor in their extensive social or business networks. A new search yielded even stranger results. The Eleanor M. Trust was registered in Delaware, a common choice for privacy, but the few public records she could find suggested it was a substantial financial entity, not just a small family trust, but something with serious assets behind it. Her phone buzzed with a text message, making her jump in the darkness. For a moment, she expected it to be her father, demanding another conversation or issuing new restrictions in response to the day's events. Instead, it was from Lily. Can't sleep. You okay? Scarlett stared at the message, surprised by the genuine concern in those 3 words. When was the last time Lily had checked on her welfare without prompting from their father or a social media opportunity? Fine, she typed back. You? Number. Keep thinking about today. About Dad. The admission hung between them across the digital divide. In all their years of manufactured sisterly rivalry, Lily had never openly criticized David. Her entire identity was built around being his perfect daughter, the compliant child who never questioned or challenged his authority. What about him? Scarlett typed carefully. The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times, as if Lily was writing and deleting responses. Finally, he's been different lately. Angrier. More. Controlling. Scarlett's breath caught. This was the closest Lily had ever come to acknowledging what Scarlett had been seeing for years. The gradual escalation of David's need to dominate every aspect of their lives. Different how? Another long pause. Then, the photo thing. The one he said you posted? I never accused you of that. The words appeared on her screen like a confession, and Scarlett felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. I know, she typed back. I figured that out today. I never posted anything. Then who did? It was a question Scarlett had been asking herself since the confrontation in the courtyard. Someone had created an anonymous account and posted an unflattering candid photo of Lily, then ensured it could be traced back to the Academy's network. Someone had wanted to create conflict between the sisters, to give David an excuse for his public outburst. But who? And more importantly, why? I don't know, she typed, but I'm going to find out. A few minutes later, Lily's response appeared. Be careful. I think Dad's watching us more closely now. The message sent a chill down Scarlett's spine. She looked around her dormitory room, suddenly aware of all the places where surveillance equipment could be hidden. Her laptop camera was covered with tape, a precaution she'd taken years ago, but there were dozens of other possibilities. Her phone, the room's electronics, even devices masquerading as decorative objects. She was about to respond to Lily when her phone buzzed with another message, this one from an unknown number. Don't use your regular devices for research. They're not secure. Gnash out Marcus. Somehow he knew what she was doing and had found a way to warn her without going through the normal communication channels. The implication hit her like ice water. If Marcus was warning her about device security, it meant he knew her father was conducting surveillance. More than that, it meant he was actively working against that surveillance. She stared at the message until it automatically deleted itself. Another indication that Marcus understood operational security far better than a simple bodyguard should. Moving carefully, Scarlett closed her laptop and slipped into her jacket. If her devices weren't secure, she needed to find another way to continue her investigation. The Academy's library had public computers that would be harder to monitor, and she still had questions that demanded answers. The dormitory halls were eerily quiet as she made her way toward the main academic building. Her sneakers whispered against the polished floors, and she found herself grateful for the sound-dampening qualities of Ashwood's expensive construction. She was halfway to the library when she heard voices coming from the administrative wing. Low, urgent conversation that seemed out of place at 3 a.m. Against her better judgment, she found herself moving toward the sound. Can't continue like this. The situation is escalating beyond what we anticipated. The voice was male, professional, but not one she recognized. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more. I understand your concerns, came another voice, this one familiar. Marcus, but we need more evidence before we can act. One public incident isn't enough. How much more evidence do you need? He struck her in front of witnesses. That should be sufficient grounds for what? Marcus's voice was sharp. A temporary restraining order that his lawyers will overturn within a week? We need documentation of the full pattern, the financial manipulation, the psychological abuse, the corporate corruption. Everything. Scarlett's blood turned to ice as the pieces began falling into place. Marcus wasn't just her bodyguard. He was investigating her father, gathering evidence of abuse and corruption for some larger purpose. But who was he working with? And more importantly, what did they plan to do with that evidence? She was so focused on the conversation that she almost missed the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. By the time she realized someone else was in the hallway, it was too late to hide. Miss Miller. Dr. Whitmore's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. What are you doing out of your dormitory at this hour? The voices from the administrative wing fell silent immediately. Scarlett's mind raced, searching for a plausible explanation that wouldn't reveal what she'd overheard. I couldn't sleep, she said, which was true enough. I was going to the library to do some reading. Whitmore studied her in the dim hallway lighting, his expression unreadable. The library is closed until morning. I suggest you return to your room and try to get some rest. Tomorrow will likely be challenging. There was something in his tone that suggested he knew more about her situation than a headmaster should. As she walked back to her dormitory under his watchful gaze, Scarlett realized that the conversation she'd overheard had revealed far more than she'd initially understood. Marcus wasn't working alone. He was part of something larger, something that involved gathering evidence against her father. And now she had to decide whether to confront him directly or continue her own investigation from the shadows. Either way, she was beginning to understand that everything she'd believed about her life was built on foundations far more fragile than she'd ever imagined. The next morning arrived with the kind of artificial brightness that made everything feel surreal. Scarlett sat in her advanced literature class, staring at the pages of Hamlet while her mind churned through the fragments of conversation she'd overheard the night before. The irony wasn't lost on her. A story about family betrayal and hidden corruption while she was living through her own version of a Danish tragedy. Miss Miller? Professor Hawthorne's voice cut through her distraction. Would you care to share your thoughts on Hamlet's relationship with his mother? Scarlett looked up to find 20 pairs of eyes focused on her, including several classmates who had witnessed yesterday's courtyard drama. The question felt loaded with subtext she wasn't prepared to unpack in public. Gertrude enables Claudius's behavior, she said carefully. She chooses willful blindness over protecting her son, because confronting the truth would destroy the life she's built. The classroom fell silent. Professor Hawthorne nodded slowly, her expression suggesting she understood the personal weight behind Scarlett's analysis. An astute observation. And what do you think drives Hamlet's need to expose that truth, despite the personal cost? Because living in a lie eventually becomes more painful than facing reality. The words hung in the air like a confession. Scarlett could feel her cheeks burning as she realized how much of herself she'd just revealed to a room full of near strangers. After class, she escaped to the one place on campus where she could think clearly, the old bell tower that had been converted into a quiet study space. The narrow spiral staircase discouraged casual visitors, and the circular room at the top provided a 360-degree view of the academy grounds. She was settling in with her laptop when footsteps echoed on the stairs below. Heavy, measured steps that she recognized immediately. Marcus appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath from the climb. He looked around the small space, taking in the strategic advantages of the location with professional assessment. Clever choice, he said. Multiple sightlines, single point of access, acoustic warning system. I just like the quiet, Scarlett replied, though his tactical evaluation was uncomfortably accurate. Marcus closed the door behind him and moved to the window facing the administrative building. We need to talk. About what? About how you're investigating my father? About the mysterious trust fund that's paying your salary? Or about whatever evidence you're gathering with your late-night meetings? His shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around. How much did you hear? Enough to know you're not who I thought you were. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally faced her, his expression had shifted into something she'd never seen before. Not the professional mask he usually wore, but something raw and uncertain. You're right, he said. I'm not just your bodyguard. I never was. The admission hit her like a physical blow, even though she'd been expecting it. Then who are you, really? My name is Marcus Rivera. That part's true. Former Army Ranger, private security specialist. But I wasn't hired by your father. Scarlett's laptop screen dimmed automatically, casting the room into softer light. The Eleanor M. Trust. His eyebrows rose slightly. You've been busy. Who is Eleanor M.? Marcus leaned against the window frame, his silhouette backlit by the morning sun. She's your grandmother. Your father's mother. The words didn't make sense at first. Scarlett blinked, trying to process information that contradicted everything she'd been told about her family history. That's impossible. My father's mother is dead. She died when I was little. No, Marcus said gently. She didn't. Eleanor Niller is very much alive, and she's been watching over you and Lily for years. The room felt like it was tilting. Scarlett gripped the edge of her chair, trying to anchor herself as her understanding of reality shifted once again. Why would my father lie about that? Because Eleanor threatened his control. 3 years ago, she confronted David about his treatment of your mother and his increasingly manipulative behavior toward you girls. When she demanded access to her granddaughters and threatened to expose his business practices, he cut her off completely, told everyone she had died. Scarlett's mind raced backward through memories, searching for inconsistencies she'd missed. Family photos with people cropped out. Conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. Her father's explosive reaction to any questions about extended family. She hired you to protect me from him. To protect both of you. But also to document what was happening in your household. Eleanor suspected the abuse was escalating, but she needed proof before she could take legal action. Legal action? Marcus moved closer, his voice dropping to ensure their conversation remained private. Your grandmother is wealthy, Scarlett. Independently wealthy, with resources that dwarf your father's tech company. She's been building a case to gain custody of you and Lily, but family court requires extensive documentation of abuse and neglect. The implications crashed over her like a wave. The photo, the one that caused yesterday's fight. That was you, wasn't it? Or someone working with you? Marcus's expression darkened. No, that came from somewhere else entirely. We've been trying to figure out who's manipulating your family dynamics from the outside. A chill ran down Scarlett's spine. If Marcus and his team hadn't orchestrated the photo incident, then someone else was playing games with her family. Someone with access to the Academy's network and knowledge of the sisters' routines. There's more, Marcus continued. Your grandmother wants to meet with you, both of you, if Lily's willing. She has information about your father's business that you need to hear. What kind of information? The kind that explains why he's so desperate to control your family's image. Why he's been systematically isolating your mother. Why he reacts so violently to any threat to his authority. Scarlett stood up, pacing to the window to look down at the courtyard where yesterday's drama had unfolded. Students moved across the space in their familiar patterns, but everything looked different now, less solid, less certain. If my grandmother is alive, if she has all these resources, why hasn't she just taken us away already? Because you're 17 and Lily's 15. In custody battles involving older teenagers, the court considers the children's preferences. She can't force you to leave if you don't want to go. And she thinks we'd choose her over our father, someone we've never met? Marcus was quiet for a moment. She thinks you'd choose freedom over control, truth over lies. She thinks you'd choose to be protected instead of managed. The words hit deeper than Scarlett expected. How long had it been since anyone had asked what she wanted, instead of telling her what she should want? When? She asked quietly. Tonight, after evening study hours. I can arrange a secure meeting off campus. Scarlett turned back to face him, studying his expression for any sign of deception. But Marcus met her gaze steadily, his brown eyes reflecting nothing but honesty and concern. Will you tell me something? She asked. The truth this time. If I can. How bad is it? My father's business, I mean. What exactly has he done? Marcus's jaw tightened. Bad enough that when it comes out, it won't just destroy his company. It'll destroy his reputation, his freedom, and any chance he has of maintaining custody of his daughters. The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. Her father wasn't just controlling and emotionally abusive. He was a criminal. Scarlett, Marcus said softly, there's something else. Something your grandmother discovered that changes everything. She waited, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to hear more revelations. Your mother's medication. The antidepressants and anxiety medication she's been taking for years? They're not just treating depression. Some of them are being used to keep her compliant, docile. Your father has been systematically drugging your mother to prevent her from protecting you. The room spun around her. Grace Miller's vacant stares, her emotional absence, her inability to intervene during David's worst moments. It hadn't been depression or weakness. It had been deliberate chemical suppression. He's been poisoning her, Scarlett whispered. Eleanor has medical evidence. Documentation of the prescriptions, analysis of the drug interactions. When this goes to court, your mother will be seen as a victim, not an enabler. Scarlett sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the scope of her father's crimes. Corporate corruption, child abuse, spousal abuse through forced medication. The man she'd always seen as controlling and manipulative was actually something much darker. Tonight, she said finally. I'll meet with her tonight. Marcus nodded. I'll make the arrangements. But Scarlett, once you know everything, there's no going back. Once you see the full picture of what your father has done, you won't be able to pretend it isn't happening anymore. She thought about Hamlet again, about the choice between comfortable lies and devastating truths. About Gertrude's willful blindness and the price of finally seeing clearly. I'm already past the point of no return, she said. I just didn't realize it until yesterday. The abandoned textile mill sat like a monument to industrial decay on the outskirts of town, its broken windows reflecting the orange glow of the setting sun. Marcus had chosen the location carefully. remote enough to avoid surveillance, but public enough that Scarlett wouldn't feel trapped if the meeting went badly. She sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's unmarked sedan, her palms sweating despite the evening chill. Through the cracked windshield, she could see a figure waiting near the mill's entrance, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and a posture that spoke of decades spent commanding boardrooms. "She looks like him," Scarlett said quietly, noting the familiar sharp cheekbones and intense eyes that had been passed down through the Niller bloodline. "Eleanor has his intelligence," Marcus replied, "but not his cruelty. She built her fortune through innovation, not manipulation." As they approached the entrance, Eleanor Niller stepped forward into the light. She was smaller than Scarlett had expected, but there was something formidable in her bearing that reminded Scarlett uncomfortably of her father's presence in a room. "Scarlett." Eleanor's voice carried the slight tremor of age, but her gaze was sharp as a blade. "You look so much like your mother did at your age." Before David broke her spirit, the words were spoken with matter-of-fact brutality that made Scarlett flinch. She'd expected some kind of gentle grandmother figure, not this woman who looked like she could dismantle corporations before breakfast. "Mrs. Niller," Scarlett said formally, unsure how to address a grandmother she'd believed dead for most of her life. "Eleanor, please. We have too much lost time to waste on formalities." Eleanor gestured toward a makeshift seating area Marcus had arranged with camping chairs and battery-powered lanterns. "I suppose Marcus has told you why I wanted to meet." "Some of it. The custody case, the documentation of abuse. But I still don't understand why you waited so long to contact us." Eleanor settled into her chair with the careful movements of someone managing arthritis but refusing to show weakness. "Because I underestimated how far David would go to maintain control. I thought he would eventually see reason, or that Grace would find the strength to leave him. I was wrong on both counts." She reached into a leather briefcase and withdrew a tablet, its screen glowing with spreadsheets and financial documents. "What I'm about to show you will be difficult to process, but you need to understand the full scope of what your father has built." The first document that appeared on the screen looked like a standard corporate organizational chart. Niller Technologies at the top, with various subsidiaries and divisions branching downward like a family tree. On the surface, your father runs a successful tech company specializing in social media analytics and targeted advertising. Nothing unusual there. But look deeper. Eleanor's finger traced across the screen, highlighting connections between different entities. 3 years ago, David began developing specialized algorithms designed to profile and target users under the age of 18. The stated purpose was to help brands reach younger demographics more effectively. Scarlett leaned forward, studying the data. "That's not illegal, is it? Lots of companies target young consumers." "Not like this." Eleanor swiped to a new document, this one filled with technical specifications and user data samples. David's system doesn't just target teenagers with advertisements. It builds comprehensive psychological profiles based on their social media activity, their search history, their private messages. Then it uses that information to manipulate their behavior. The implications began to sink in as Scarlett read through the technical documentation. He's not just selling products to kids. He's studying them, learning how to control them. Exactly. And the primary testing ground for these algorithms has been Lily's social media platforms. Scarlett's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Eleanor pulled up a new screen showing analytics dashboards that tracked user engagement across Lily's various accounts. But these weren't normal social media metrics. These were psychological manipulation tools, measuring emotional responses, behavioral changes, and susceptibility to influence. Every post Lily makes, every interaction with her followers, every piece of content she shares, it's all designed to test different psychological manipulation techniques. Your father has been using your sister as an unwitting test subject to perfect his ability to control teenage behavior. The tablet slipped from Scarlett's numb fingers. She thought about Lily's careful content creation, her obsession with engagement metrics, her anxiety when posts didn't perform as expected. It hadn't been normal teenage social media pressure. It had been systematic psychological experimentation. "The eating disorder," Scarlett whispered, "her anxiety attacks. That's not just from social media pressure, is it?" Eleanor's expression grew grim. The algorithms are designed to create emotional dependency. The better they work, the more unstable their test subjects become. Lily's mental health issues aren't a side effect of the program. They're proof that it's working. Scarlett stood up abruptly, pacing away from the chairs as nausea washed over her. She knows. She has to know something's wrong. Which is why David has been so careful to isolate her from outside perspectives. Why he's positioned you as the problem sister. The one causing family drama. Lily can't see what's being done to her because she's been conditioned to see you as the threat to her success. And the photo incident? The one that caused the fight yesterday? Eleanor and Marcus exchanged a look that made Scarlett's stomach clench with dread. We believe that was David himself, Marcus said quietly. Or someone working directly for him. He needed to create a public justification for increased control over both of you. The photo incident gave him an excuse to escalate his surveillance and paint you as a danger to Lily's brand. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Her father hadn't just been emotionally abusive, he'd been orchestrating psychological warfare against his own daughters, pitting them against each other while using one as a test subject for technology designed to manipulate children. How many kids? Scarlett asked, her voice barely audible. How many what? Eleanor replied. How many other kids has he tested this on? How many teenagers has he experimented on through Lily's platforms? Eleanor consulted her tablet. Current estimates suggest approximately 8 million active users in the primary demographic. Most of them don't know they're part of an experiment. The number hit Scarlett like a physical blow. Nearly 3 million teenagers being psychologically manipulated through her sister's social media presence, all to perfect her father's ability to control and exploit young minds. We have to stop him, she said, turning back to face Eleanor and Marcus. We have to expose all of this. That's why I hired Marcus, Eleanor said. That's why I've been building this case for 3 years. But I need both you and Lily's cooperation to make it work. The evidence is stronger if it comes from his own daughters. Lily won't believe it. She can't afford to believe it. Her entire identity is built around being Dad's perfect daughter. Eleanor reached for Scarlett's hand, her touch surprisingly warm despite the evening chill. Then we help her see the truth gradually. We show her that she can have a different kind of success, a different kind of life. One where she's valued for who she is, not for how well she can be controlled. Scarlett looked down at her grandmother's weathered fingers, thinking about all the years they'd been kept apart by David's lies. All the support and protection she could have had if she'd known Eleanor existed. What about Mom? If she's been drugged all this time, can she recover? With proper medical care and therapy, yes. Grace is stronger than she appears. She's been fighting David's control in small ways for years, even through the medication. Once she's free of the chemical suppression, I believe she'll be a fierce protector of her daughters. The weight of hope felt almost as heavy as the weight of truth. After years of feeling isolated and powerless, Scarlett was learning that she had allies she'd never known existed, resources she'd never imagined, and a chance to not just escape her father's control, but to help save other families from the same fate. When do we start? She asked. Eleanor smiled for the first time since they'd met, and, in that expression, Scarlett caught a glimpse of the loving grandmother she'd been denied for 17 years. We already have. Grace Niller sat in her art studio, a converted guest room that had been gathering dust for years, staring at the blank canvas propped on her easel. Her hands trembled as she held the paintbrush, not from artistic inspiration, but from the slow withdrawal process that Dr. Sarah Chen had warned her about. 3 days had passed since Eleanor's covert medical team had begun replacing her psychiatric medications with carefully monitored placebos. 3 days of gradual awakening that felt like emerging from a decade-long coma. The fog is lifting, she whispered to herself, testing words that felt foreign in her mouth. For so long, thoughts had moved through her mind like honey, slow and thick and impossible to grasp. Now, sharp edges of memory were cutting through the medicated haze. David's voice echoed from downstairs, talking to someone on the phone about controlling the narrative and managing family disruptions. The familiar sound of his corporate authority sent ice through her veins. But for the first time in years, fear was accompanied by something else. Clarity. She remembered the gradual increase in her medication dosages. The way David had dismissed her concerns about feeling disconnected from her daughters. The convenient explanations about postpartum depression that had somehow stretched on for 15 years. The morning sun cast long shadows across Ashwood Academy's pristine grounds, but the tranquil facade couldn't mask the tension crackling through the corridors. Word had spread overnight. Fragmented whispers about surveillance equipment found in students' rooms, about federal investigators asking questions, about the Niller family's carefully constructed empire beginning to crumble. Scarlett walked to her first class, with Marcus flanking her at a closer distance than usual. His military training was evident in the way his eyes constantly swept their surroundings, cataloging potential threats and escape routes. The past week of revelations had transformed him from a mysterious bodyguard into what she now recognized as a tactical protector, preparing for war. "He knows," Marcus said quietly as they passed a cluster of whispering students. "David's figured out that Eleanor has been building a case against him. The evidence was everywhere if you knew how to look for it. The sudden appearance of additional security cameras around campus. The way faculty members avoided eye contact with Scarlett in the hallways. The black SUVs with tinted windows that had been parked outside the academy gate since yesterday morning." "How much does he know?" Scarlett asked, her voice barely audible above the sound of their footsteps on marble floors. "Enough to be dangerous. Eleanor received word that he's hired a crisis management firm and a team of lawyers specializing in family court cases. He's not just defending anymore. He's going on the offensive." They reached her advanced literature classroom, but instead of his usual position outside the door, Marcus followed her inside. Professor Hawthorne looked up from her desk with obvious surprise, but didn't object to the security presence. Scarlett had barely settled into her seat when her phone buzzed with an urgent text from Lily. "Something's wrong. Dad pulled me out of classes. Says we're going home early for family discussion. I'm scared." Ice flooded Scarlett's veins. She showed the message to Marcus, whose expression darkened immediately. "We need to move now," he said, already standing. "Professor Hawthorne, I need to remove Miss Niller from class immediately. It's a family emergency." The next few minutes blurred together in a haze of rapid movement and urgent phone calls. Marcus spoke in clipped, military phrases to someone on his encrypted phone, while guiding Scarlett through the academy's back corridors toward the administrative building. "Eleanor's legal team is 15 minutes out," he reported. "But David's already here. He's in Headmaster Whitmore's office with Lily and a team of lawyers." They could hear raised voices before they reached the administrative wing, David's commanding tone cutting through the air like a blade, punctuated by what sounded like Lily's distressed protests. "I will not allow my family to be destroyed by malicious lies and fabricated evidence," David's voice carried clearly through the heavy oak doors. "My daughters are being manipulated by people with financial motivations to tear apart our family." Marcus positioned himself beside the door, his hand moving instinctively toward the concealed weapons Scarlett now knew he carried. "Stay behind me," he instructed quietly. "Whatever happens in there, whatever he says or does, remember that help is coming." But even as he spoke the reassuring words, Scarlett could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers flexed as if preparing for combat. David Niller had discovered that his carefully controlled world was collapsing around him, and cornered predators were always at their most dangerous. The shouting from inside the office suddenly stopped, replaced by an ominous silence that made both Scarlett and Marcus freeze. Then came the sound of something crashing to the floor, followed by Lily's scream. Marcus didn't hesitate. The moment Lily's scream cut through the silence, he was in motion, his shoulder connecting with the heavy oak door of Headmaster Whitmore's office, with enough force to splinter the frame. The scene inside looked like a battlefield after the smoke had cleared. David stood behind Whitmore's mahogany desk, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, his tie askew and his face flushed with rage. Lily cowered in a corner chair, tears streaming down her face, while Headmaster Whitmore pressed a cloth napkin against a cut on his forehead. "Get away from her," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced down armed insurgents in foreign war zones. David's head snapped toward the doorway, his eyes wild with the kind of desperation that came from watching a lifetime of careful control crumble in real time. "This is a private family matter, Rivera. You have no authority here." "Actually, he does." Eleanor Niller's voice cut through the tension as she appeared behind Marcus and Scarlett, flanked by two men in expensive suits and a woman with the bearing of federal law enforcement. "As of this morning, Marcus Rivera has been designated as temporary guardian for both Scarlett and Lily, pending the resolution of child endangerment charges." The words hit the room like a physical blow. David's face cycled through shock, rage, and something that looked almost like fear before settling into the cold calculation that Scarlett recognized from his worst moments. "You can't do this," he said, his voice dropping to the dangerous whisper that had terrorized his family for years. "These are my daughters. My family. You have no legal standing to—" "Federal Judge Morrison disagrees," Eleanor interrupted, producing a sheaf of legal documents. "Emergency custody order, granted based on documented evidence of physical abuse, psychological manipulation, and child exploitation for commercial purposes." One of Eleanor's lawyers, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, stepped forward with additional paperwork. "Mr. Niller, you're being served with temporary restraining orders prohibiting contact with your daughters, pending a full investigation into your business practices and treatment of your family." The transformation in David was immediate and terrifying. The mask of civilized authority that he wore in public completely dissolved, revealing something primitive and vicious underneath. "You think you can take my children from me?" His voice rose to a shout that echoed off the office's wood-paneled walls. "You think some senile old woman and her hired thugs can destroy everything I've built?" He moved toward Lily with sudden violence, but Marcus was already there, his body blocking David's path with military precision. The two men faced each other across 3 feet of Persian carpet, and Scarlett could see the moment when David realized he was facing someone who wouldn't be intimidated by corporate power or family connections. "Sir," Marcus said quietly, "step back now, or I will make you step back." The federal agent moved closer to Eleanor, her hand resting casually near the weapon concealed beneath her jacket. "Mr. Niller, you're currently in violation of a federal court order. I strongly suggest you comply with the directives being issued." For a moment, the office balanced on the edge of violence. David's hands clenched into fists, his breath coming in sharp bursts as he stared at his daughters, one sobbing in the corner, the other standing defiantly behind the man he'd hired to protect her. Then something seemed to break inside him. Not toward acceptance or surrender, but toward a different kind of dangerous calculation. "This isn't over," he said, his voice returning to its usual controlled tone. "You may have won this battle, but you've started a war that will destroy all of you. Especially you, Scarlett." The way he said her name, with such cold malice, made her step closer to Marcus without conscious thought. "And you, Lily," David continued, his gaze shifting to his younger daughter. "When this fantasy falls apart and you're left with nothing, remember who loved you enough to build you an empire. Remember who you betrayed when some strangers told you pretty lies about freedom." Eleanor moved protectively toward Lily, her voice sharp with authority. "That's enough, David. You're leaving now, voluntarily, or Agent Morrison will arrest you for violating a federal court order." David straightened his tie with deliberate calm, his public mask sliding back into place. "Of course. I'll be in touch through my attorneys." He walked toward the door with measured steps, pausing only when he reached Scarlett. For a moment, she thought he might try to embrace her, to make some final gesture of paternal affection for the watching officials. Instead, he leaned close enough that only she could hear his whispered words. "You have no idea what you've just destroyed. And when the consequences catch up with you, remember that you chose this." Then he was gone, leaving behind only the sound of expensive shoes echoing down marble corridors and the weight of a threat that felt more like a promise. 6 weeks later, The federal courthouse in downtown Boston buzzed with media attention that transformed the marble steps into a carnival of reporters, cameras, and legal analysts, dissecting every development in United States versus David Niller. What had begun as a family custody dispute had evolved into a landmark case involving corporate malfeasance, child exploitation, and the dark intersection of social media influence and psychological manipulation. Scarlett sat in the witness waiting room, her hands folded in her lap as she listened to the muffled sounds of legal proceedings through the heavy wooden doors. Eleanor sat beside her, offering quiet reassurance, while Marcus positioned himself near the window with the tactical awareness that had become second nature over the past month and a half. "How's Lily doing?" Scarlett asked, though she already knew the answer would be complicated. "Better," Eleanor replied carefully. "Dr. Chen says the therapy is helping her process the extent of the manipulation she experienced. But testifying today will be difficult." That was an understatement. Lily's recovery had been painful to witness, watching her sister realize that her entire identity as a social media influencer had been built on psychological experimentation designed to exploit both her and her millions of followers. The eating disorder and anxiety attacks that had seemed like normal teenage struggles revealed themselves as deliberate byproducts of algorithmic manipulation, calibrated to create emotional dependency. The door opened, and Eleanor's lead attorney, Patricia Valdez, entered with the controlled urgency that had characterized the legal team's approach throughout the case. "Scarlett, we're ready for your testimony. The prosecution has done an excellent job establishing the technical aspects of your father's data harvesting operation, but your personal account will humanize the charges for the jury." Scarlett nodded, though her stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. She'd been preparing for this moment for weeks, but the thought of facing her father across a courtroom while describing years of abuse felt overwhelming. "Remember," Marcus said quietly, "you're not alone in there. You have a team of people who believe you, who've documented everything, who are fighting for you, and Lily, and all the other kids who were affected by his programs." The courtroom was larger than she'd expected, filled with journalists, legal observers, and representatives from digital privacy advocacy groups who had rallied around the case. But Scarlett's attention focused immediately on the defendant's table, where David Niller sat in an expensive charcoal suit that made him look like the successful tech executive he'd been, rather than the criminal he was accused of being. He turned as she entered, and for a moment their eyes met across the formal space. His expression was unreadable, not the rage she'd expected, but something colder and more calculating. The look of someone who still believed he could control the narrative through sheer force of will. Assistant District Attorney James Morrison guided Scarlett through her testimony with professional compassion, allowing her to tell her story chronologically while introducing exhibits that corroborated her account. The financial records showing payments to Marcus from Eleanor's trust, the technical documentation of the psychological manipulation algorithms, the medical evidence of Grace's systematic drugging. "Ms. Niller," Morrison said as they approached the most difficult part of her testimony, "can you describe for the jury what happened on Parents' Weekend at Ashwood Academy?" Scarlett took a breath, centering herself with techniques Dr. Chen had taught her for managing trauma responses. "My father arrived expecting me to participate in a photo shoot for my sister's social media accounts. When I refused, he accused me of sabotaging Lily's brand by posting an unflattering photo of her. Had you posted such a photo? Number. I later learned that my father or someone working for him had created the incident to justify increased surveillance and control over both me and my sister. What happened when you refused to apologize for something you hadn't done?" The courtroom fell silent as Scarlett described the escalating confrontation, the public humiliation, and finally, the moment when David's control snapped completely. "He slapped me. Hard enough that people throughout the courtyard could hear the sound. In front of parents, students, faculty, everyone who was there for the weekend. And what happened next? Marcus, Mr. Rivera, stepped between us. He protected me from further violence, and made it clear that he wouldn't allow my father to hurt me again." Morrison nodded, then moved to the prosecution table to retrieve a tablet loaded with evidence. "Miss Niller, I'm showing you exhibits 47 through 52, which are screenshots from your sister's social media accounts over the past 3 years. Can you tell the jury what you notice about the content? Scarlett studied the images, seeing with new eyes the carefully crafted posts that had seemed like typical teenage social media activity. But now she could identify the psychological manipulation techniques Eleanor's experts had explained. The emotional triggers designed to create dependency, the subtle messaging that encouraged unhealthy behaviors, the algorithmic optimization that prioritized engagement over well-being. Every post was designed to test different ways of influencing teenage behavior. The captions, the images, even the timing. It was all calculated to maximize psychological impact on young users. And what was the impact on your sister personally? Scarlett glanced toward the gallery where Lily sat with Grace, both of them surrounded by Eleanor's security team. Her sister looked fragile but determined, her own testimony scheduled for later in the day. Lily developed an eating disorder and severe anxiety. She became obsessed with engagement metrics and approval from strangers online. She lost the ability to distinguish between her authentic self and the persona that was being used to manipulate other teenagers. The defense attorney's cross-examination was aggressive, but ultimately ineffective. David's legal team tried to paint Scarlett as a jealous sister, motivated by resentment toward Lily's success, but the documentary evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, technical specifications, medical reports, and testimony from federal investigators created a web of proof that couldn't be dismissed as family drama. When Lily took the stand later that afternoon, her testimony was devastating. Speaking in a clear, steady voice that belied her 15 years, she described the psychological pressure of living as a test subject for her father's manipulation algorithms. "I wasn't just his daughter," she said, looking directly at David as she spoke. "I was his laboratory rat. Every post I made, every interaction with my followers, every moment of my life was data for him to analyze and exploit." The final blow came when Grace testified about the systematic drugging that had kept her compliant and unable to protect her daughters. Her voice, clear for the first time in years thanks to proper medical care, carried the weight of a mother's rage as she described watching her children suffer while being chemically prevented from intervening. When the jury returned their verdict 3 days later, guilty on all counts of child exploitation, corporate fraud, and domestic abuse, David Niller's expression finally cracked. The mask of corporate authority dissolved completely, revealing the broken man beneath who had destroyed his family in pursuit of power and control. As federal marshals led him away in handcuffs, David turned one last time toward his daughters. But instead of the defiance or rage Scarlett expected, she saw something that looked almost like recognition, the belated understanding of what he had sacrificed in his pursuit of absolute control. Scarlett felt Marcus's hand on her shoulder as they watched her father disappear through the courthouse doors. After 17 years of living under his manipulation and abuse, it was finally over. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Eleanor's Boston penthouse, casting golden light across walls lined with Grace's newest paintings, vibrant landscapes that seemed to pulse with the creative energy that had been suppressed for so many years. 6 months after David's conviction, the apartment had become a sanctuary where the Niller women were learning to be a family again. Scarlett sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, her laptop balanced on her knees as she worked on her college application essays. The early admission letter from Stanford lay on the coffee table beside her, acceptance to their computer science program, with a focus on digital ethics and privacy protection. Her personal statement had written itself, a 17-year-old's manifesto about technology's responsibility to protect rather than exploit the vulnerable. "Any regrets about not going back to Ashwood?" Eleanor asked from her reading chair, where she was reviewing quarterly reports from the nonprofit foundation she'd established to help families affected by digital manipulation. "None," Scarlett replied honestly. The exclusive boarding school felt like a relic from someone else's life. She'd completed her senior year through independent study while testifying in the civil cases that followed her father's criminal conviction. Dozens of families whose children had been unknowingly manipulated through Lily's platforms were seeking damages, and Scarlett's testimony had become crucial evidence in their fight for justice. Lily emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of tea, her movements more relaxed than Scarlett had seen in years. At 16, she was discovering interests beyond social media: photography that captured genuine moments rather than manufactured content, volunteer work with teenagers recovering from eating disorders, and a growing passion for psychology that she traced directly to understanding her own manipulation. "Jamie called," Lily announced, settling onto the couch beside Grace, who was sketching preliminary designs for her upcoming gallery show. "She wants to know if we're still planning to visit her family for Thanksgiving." The prospect of spending the holiday with Jamie's boisterous, loving clan in suburban Cleveland had become a beacon of normalcy they were all anticipating. After years of carefully orchestrated family gatherings designed for social media consumption, the chaos of genuine family affection felt revolutionary. "Absolutely," Grace said, looking up from her sketch pad with a smile that reached her eyes for the first time in years. "I can't wait to meet the people who supported our Scarlet when we couldn't." Marcus appeared in the doorway, no longer their bodyguard, but someone who had become family through shared trauma and mutual protection. He'd taken a position with Eleanor's security firm, specializing in protecting families targeted by digital stalking and manipulation. "The forensic accountants finished their analysis," he reported, his expression carrying satisfaction mixed with grim vindication. "David's assets are being liquidated to fund victim compensation. Between the criminal restitution and the civil settlements, every family affected by his programs will receive substantial damages." The news should have felt triumphant, but Scarlett found herself thinking about her father instead. Now serving 15 years in federal prison, his tech empire dismantled, his reputation destroyed. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a profound sadness for what their family might have been if he'd chosen love over control. "Any word from him?" she asked quietly. Eleanor shook her head. "His attorneys say he's not ready for family contact. Maybe someday, when he's had time to understand what he did. But that's his journey to make." As evening settled over the city, Scarlett found herself on Eleanor's balcony, looking out over the lights of Boston while processing how completely her life had changed. A year ago, she'd been the difficult daughter of a tech mogul, isolated and rebellious, fighting a war she didn't understand against enemies she couldn't identify. Now she was simply Scarlett, a young woman with a grandmother who adored her, a sister who had become her closest friend, a mother who was rediscovering her strength, and a future built on truth rather than manipulation. Her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Saw the news coverage. Your testimony helped me leave my abusive family. Thank you for being brave enough to speak truth. A grateful stranger." Similar messages arrived daily now, from teenagers who had recognized their own manipulation in Lily's story, from parents who had discovered surveillance software on their children's devices, from families who had found the courage to seek help after watching the Nillers' public journey toward healing. Marcus joined her on the balcony, carrying 2 cups of Eleanor's famous hot chocolate. "Regrets?" he asked, echoing Eleanor's earlier question. Scarlett considered the word, weighing it against everything they'd endured and overcome. The public scrutiny, the legal battles, the painful process of rebuilding relationships that had been poisoned by years of manipulation. "No," she said finally. "Not about exposing the truth. Not about fighting back. Not about choosing this family over his version of control." Through the glass doors, she could see her mother and sister laughing at something Eleanor had said, their faces illuminated by lamplight and genuine joy. It was a scene that would never have been possible under David's regime: authentic emotion, unguarded happiness, love without conditions or performance metrics. "What about you?" she asked Marcus. "Any regrets about stepping between me and him that day?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the city lights stretching toward the horizon. "Only that it took me so long to realize what was really happening. 3 years of watching and documenting, when I should have acted sooner." "You acted when it mattered most," Scarlett said, remembering the moment in the courtyard when everything changed. "When I needed protection, you were there. When we needed evidence, you had gathered it. When we needed an ally, you chose us over him." They stood in comfortable silence, 2 people who had found family in the most unlikely circumstances. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: college applications, therapy sessions, the ongoing work of healing from trauma. But tonight, surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally, Scarlett felt something she'd never experienced in her father's house: peace. The future stretched before her like an unwritten story, full of possibilities that were hers to choose rather than his to control. And for the first time in her 17 years, that future felt bright with authentic hope. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.